And welcome to another exciting episode of the Mando Method Podcast. I am your co-host and bourbon drinker and Iron Maiden fan, Armand Rosamilia.
And I'm the other co-host, Chuck Buda, and I'm also all those things.
That makes it easy. So we got a couple of really cool guests. This is video and audio, which we do about once a month. And me and Chuck get to cheat. We get to bring in a couple of people that can talk and throw ideas at us, and then we don't have to think too much, which is freaking awesome doing this after 300 episodes. So that's pretty cool. But first, Chuck, what do we want to talk about?
I think we want to talk about Reaper's Brew Coffee. It's horror themed, of course, and it's a veteran-owned company. You can get single bags, subscriptions, K-cups. Everything's microbrewed and fresh roasted. And of course, they've got the two great flavors, the Murder Mud, which is the regular, and the Electric Chair, which is the high caffeine. And if you want to play mad scientist chemist like me, you mix them together and boy, howdy, you don't know how it's going to turn out, but you're going to crank out a lot of words that day. And don't forget to use the coupon code MANDO, that's M-A-N-D-O, at checkout, and you'll receive 10% off of new orders, plus receive a free gift. Go to reapersbrew.com and tell them Uncle Charlie sent you.
All right. As usual, once again, thank you, Reaper's Brew, for sponsoring us this week. So we have two cool guests. So let's get some introductions. Introduce yourselves, boys, and we can start this rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Shane Wilson. I am a writer of contemporary fantasy novels and stories. I've also done some music, but definitely not in the genre of Iron Maiden or even adjacent to that. But, you know, to each his own. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Welcome.
Hey, everybody. My name's Paul Bahu. I like to write sci-fi and horror. My most recent novel is Sunset Distortion, The Pyramid at the End of the World. Wow. And when I'm not doing that, I own a recycling company. And yeah, party on, guys. Let's do it.
So I got to ask you, Shane, what kind of music do you do or do you listen to?
Yeah, so I have I grew up in the South. I'm Alabama born, Georgia raised, and so I grew up around a lot of country music. I grew to dislike the country that was on the radio that was on like sort of contemporary country music stations. I grew up sort of I liked the stuff when I was a kid, right? That was sort of the age of the Tim McGraws and those sorts of guys. Mm. But then as I started to get a little bit older, things started to drift a little bit closer to, I guess, what they would call bro country. And so, what would eventually become the Florida Georgia Lines of the world, and that stuff just didn't resonate with me. I felt like the men in country music, especially, they were just producing kind of flat, thin music. They were sort of getting away from the storytelling roots of the genre that drew me to it as a child. And then I sort of left country music and went after the more sort of like lyrical storytellers. I liked Bruce Springsteen and those folks. And then as an adult, I have discovered the Americana genre and sort of that American roots music where you have really great, what I would consider real country music being written and produced that is in that narrative tradition. And I'm thinking about artists like Jason Isbell, who I have immense respect for, right? And so that's sort of like where my like genesis was in music. And I didn't really play music growing up or any of that stuff. I took piano lessons like every kid, but didn't really buy into it. And then I started writing this novel, The Smoke in His Eyes, which is about a guitarist, and I didn't know anything about it. So I thought, well, I should probably know something about it. So I kind of taught myself to play through some like really basic stuff. And that was kind of the beginning of my own musical journey.
Oh, pretty. See, Chuck, this right here. This is a Southerner, not you from Jersey.
All right. Well, whatever.
Chuck moved from Jersey to Knoxville like 6 months ago, and he thinks he's a Southerner. My
now
wife,
he's a Southerner.
yeah, and my wife, who was born in Jacksonville, always wants to punch him in the face for saying that because it's just not right. Ugh. Yeah, we're Jersey guys, so we definitely, I'm definitely a Springsteen fan.
Yeah, obviously, right. He's sort of like the second coming up there, right?
Yeah, and
in a lot of ways.
Bon Jovi for me and Chuck, Bon Jovi and Springsteen were always the two big ones when we were kids coming up.
Yeah, I've just really, my parents didn't like Springsteen for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. I think maybe they just didn't like his voice or something. And so he was never really played in the house. And then when I grew up and discovered his music, I was like, yo, like this dude has really got some stuff to say, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think The River is probably one of my favorite records of all time.
Yeah, all of it is amazing. Yeah, my parents didn't. My parents were not fans of Springsteen either growing up. So it was weird, like friends, brothers, older brothers driving around in their little dusters and stuff playing Springsteen. You know, yeah. That's how you found out about it. Or you heard, Born to Run on the radio, but you didn't hear the rest of the album until you got older and you started, you go see him live at the Garden and stuff. So that's pretty stuff for me. What do you listen to, Paul? You look like you're shocked here what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I got the hair, so clearly I've been in a band at some point in time in my life. I am hard rock adjacent, if you will. I played in bands since I was a kid, and it was always some version of rock music. I was in a punk band, and then I was in an alternative rock band, and then we got into hard rock, and then I had a prog rock band after that one broke up. So it's always been in kind of that circle, that family tree of rock and roll, if you will.
As you learn to play your instrument, you move from the punk to the
exactly.
You go up the ladder, yeah.
As a bass player, I started off I could play the chord progression and I could play it fast, and that's about all I could do. Don't ask me for more. And then you just get better and better and better and better. And then I had kids, and I'm like, holy crap, I don't have much time. I don't know what kind of language I can use on your podcast, but yeah.
No fucking cursing, Paul. No.
Oh, all right, all right. I'll watch my fucking mouth. So, yeah. Now I write books, and I don't really have the bass in my hand so much these days. But no, I like Bruce Springsteen. I was just thinking, have you ever heard of a band called The War on Drugs? They are like a modern kind of version of that Heartland rock with a saxophone kind of sound. Chef's kiss. Great band.
I'm roughly familiar with I would be hard pressed right now to tell you the name of one of their songs, but I have heard their music.
Oh man, you got to Spotify that shit the second this thing is over.
Yeah.
Good stuff. No, I love all genres. I can talk about any genre you wanna throw at me.
Let's talk about books though. Let's talk. How'd you guys first get involved with writing and saying, what, I wanna put a book out?
Shane, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can. Listen, if I start to ramble, just throw a hand up, tell me to stop, shut up, whatever, because it's one of those things where I'm not 100% sure, and I guess Paul is a great. All of us are probably really good experts on this particular thing, and that is I don't know that any person ever writes their first novel on purpose. For me, it was an accident. But when I say accident, I mean, I had always been a writer. I had always written short fiction. I had written poetry. I had published in those genres. And to me, the idea that I was going to climb this mountain and write this, novel length work was something that just seemed unattainable. And so I sat down to write a poem one day that was, a sad sack of shit love poem. And I was like, I have to reinvent the genre, right? Because every love poem that's ever going to be written has already been written. And so what am I going to do to change the game? And so I wrote 6 pages of shitty poetry and didn't change any games. And so I threw that in the drawer, and I was like, well, that's not going to happen. The name of that poem was called A Year Since the Rain. And so then a year later, I started writing the story about this small town that went into a drought, and the ground got so dry that it started to crumble in on itself. And I thought, okay, well, this could be A Year Since the Rain, right? Like, it's an allegory for whatever like bullshit I was going to talk about in that poem. Like, I'm just going to like feed it into this narrative. And I thought it was a short story, and then it was 6,000 words long, and then I thought, and it wasn't like wrapping up, and I thought, okay, so maybe it's a novella, and then it's 15,000 words long, still not wrapping up, and then I thought, okay, so I'm writing a novel, I might as well see this thing out to the end, and I did, and then it was over, and I thought, well, I have it, I might as well try to do something with it, right?
Yeah, and
Nice.
I think that's kind of how it's. I also started. I think Chuck started. You start with the short stories, and you kind of get your feet wet, and then it starts to build from like the 90s were all short stories for me, and then the 2000s were novellas, and now I'm just like pumping out novels like crazy, and it's like, you just kind of move up the ladder there, kind of like Paul starting in a shitty punk band and then moving up to his prog rock stuff.
We were horrible, just so bad. I remember one of my core memories was we recorded our first album. I was in like 10th grade, and I was just so proud. I'm like, we're a legit band. We have our shitty, CD circa 1998. And I went and showed the band director, and I was like, yeah, let's do a record. What do you think? And so we give it to him the next day. I'm like, what'd you think? He's like, I didn't like it. Like, you're supposed to inspire me, guy. What is it? But he was right. It was terrible. It wasn't good. Yeah, my journey with novels, I'm the exact opposite from like kind of both of you. Well, I always wanted, my first novel was me sitting down to write a novel. I've always been in bands. That was my creative outlet. That was my thing. Loved writing music, putting records out. I just loved the process of it. And then my last band broke up in like 2015, and I was trying to get some new players together, and getting people in a band is tough. You got to sync schedules, let alone trying to find someone that can even play their instrument, right? And they're not a total prick. So I just couldn't find the replacement people. I said, screw this. I'm writing my novel I always said I was going to write. So I did. It was a story. It was a short story I wrote when I was in college in a creative writing class. And then Fred and I were going to turn it into a comic book, and we kind of got that going. And then the artist quit when we got the first little bit of criticism of his work. And I said, I can't work with anybody on anything creative. I'm going to do this thing myself. So I spent like 5 years just taking this short story, novelizing it, kind of like what Shane's journey, though. It's like, it just keeps going and you're not wrapping it up. And so you just write and kind of follow the story as it leads, less than saying, oh, I have to have a hard stop here. And it's about an 80s rocker who gets abducted by space aliens and sent on this odyssey to find this ancient alien artifact. It's it's kind of wild and out there. Definitely not hard sci-fi. It's very loose and conceptual, but fun nonetheless.
Sounds like a Nikki Sixx memoir, but
yeah, but more drugs.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
So I guess to jump in, to talk about your writing life, and it's great to hear you both talk about kind of like how you guys got into this and your different creative outlets and stuff. But from the work side, the more nuts and bolts side, how do you guys view your productivity? Do you sit down and kind of parse out your year and say, this is what I want to try and get done this year? Or do you wait for the muse to strike? Or do you have like weekly goals, monthly goals? Like, how do you both, attack the craft of writing from a productivity standard?
Paul, would you like to go first this time?
Sure, buddy. I got this one. I always liken doing something creative, and it could be more than just writing. It could be writing a song. It could be trying to paint. Anything. It's like surfing a wave, right? You have to go to the beach in order to surf, and you're not going to get waves every single day, but you have to physically go to the beach. So I try to put myself into a position to write, but it's okay if nothing really comes out. It's like, okay, just today wasn't my day. I didn't really have anything, and I'll come back again tomorrow. And so I just find those bits of time. I mean, everyone's situation is different. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and man, are those kids time intensive. So it's, I do a lot of my writing when I'm putting my kids to bed. Like, I'll have like my 1-year-old on me, and I'm like working on a story on my phone. And I had to find I had to be flexible in how I'm the format in which I'm writing. Like I started writing on my phone a lot more just because I can't have my laptop and a baby and I'm in the rocking chair going back and forth. So writing in any way I can, giving myself the opportunities, going to the beach as often as possible to see if that wave comes to me.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that you absolutely hit it on the head with you've got to show up, right? Like that's absolutely that's 90% of it. And that's what I tell. So I'm a college English teacher. I teach at a 2-year school. I teach mostly composition courses, but I also teach creative writing and some lit stuff. But I tell my creative writing students all the time that like this is actual work, right? You have to show up for the work of it or it's never going to get done. And so with that in mind, though, I teach in a given semester, I teach 6 courses. That's like 125 students if they're all comp courses. And all of those students are writing just bukus of pages. And as you can probably assume, they're all super riveting. And none of them are trite at all. And it's not at all exhausting to try to read all of that stuff, right? And then also provide meaningful feedback. And so I think that during an academic year, my brain is in a completely different direction. It is not in the creative avenue. It is much more editorial minded. So I use academic years whenever I do have a little bit of energy, like mental capacity for this. I use that opportunity to do like my editing on my work as well, right? Because that's sort of like the way that my brain is headed. And then I'm lucky enough to work in a state and at a school that pays me enough to take the 2 summer months off. And that's when I show up every day, sit in the chair for hours at a time. I don't really like set benchmark goals as much. Like I'm not the guy that wakes up and I'm like, I'm not getting up until I've written 5,000 words, you know? I just try to write until I can't anymore for that day. And I think it just kind of depends on where I am in the story and where I am in the process of sort of thinking through that. My goal every summer is to get as far as I can into a new manuscript or to finish one that I've already started. And sometimes that works. Sometimes a story will just a novel will just come out sort of all in one piece, all at one time in 2 months. And it's amazing. And then at other times it takes a couple of years to stitch it together. And, you know, like I've done a lot of contemporary fantasy over the last several years, and that stuff is now kind of almost automatic. It's like muscle memory. Those stories come out a little bit easier, but I'm also now, last summer I started to play in more of a Southern Gothic sort of sandbox. And that was a little bit more of a struggle because I hadn't really written in that genre before. And so I found myself stopping and doing a bunch of research about like genre research, right? Mm-hmm. And that sort of thing. And so it's a little bit more stop and go when I get into something new, right? Because the academic in me wants to understand it from every single perspective before I really launch into it.
It's got to be tough as a teacher too, because self-publishing because of Amazon, and all of this. I'm a hybrid. I do self-publishing and I also work with publishers. Chuck is self-published for the most part. But I got to imagine you're reading through that slog of stories, and some of those kids are going to go publish that story. Some of those kids are thinking this is the greatest thing ever, and I'm going to go out there. And I mean that's for me that would drive me crazy.
Yeah, I mean I don't know how much you want me to talk about it, but I could talk a lot about it because I had a student in my creative writing class this year that had already published a collection of poems. And I felt some kind of way about it because I read her work and she wasn't showing up for the work, right? And that's sort of the thing that drives me crazy about teaching creative writing is that sometimes you get students that show up and they're like eager to learn. I'm no like sage on the stage, but I try to give them the toolkit and the resources that can make them better. I think that workshop is really important because it exposes you to the work of your peers and all of that. And the students that show up that think that they're already super accomplished are the ones that aren't willing to do the work. And I'm like, if you are the expert that you think you are, then you should be willing to share your expertise with the other people in the class, right? And they're just like, it's like they show up and they just want kind of like an attaboy, and and they don't really want to put in the effort. They see their self-published collection of poetry like on Amazon, and they think that creative writing is going to be an easy A, right? Because they've already done it.
Right.
And I don't know what the track record really is for that, but this one student was not very good at poetry. So
I always look at that and I say, I look at my first stuff I released back in the 90s and, zines and stuff. And I'm like, that was god awful. I'm in my 20s and I'm writing awful horror stories. And I'm glad none of that stuff is around anymore. I'm glad some of it I have copies of that will never be seen because they were just so bad.
Well, I think that anything, I think being an artist at all requires a significant amount of self-awareness and acknowledgement of evolution, right? Because I know also that the shit I was writing 10 years ago is not very good, right? But I wrote it, I own it, I'm aware of that, right? I can grow from that. I think that self-awareness is so important, and I think that a lot of people just lack that, or they're too self-serious maybe. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something.
I think people
it's weird. It's just like, you write your first million words and you throw that shit out. I mean, that's literally how you do. But now you see 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds that I'm constantly talking to, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to put my short story collection. I'm like, don't do that.
Right.
Because the 28-year-old you or the 38-year-old you is going to go, why did I do that? Why was that my first step forward? And it's that, it's where we are. It's that attitude that, I sound like the old man, but it's like that I wrote a story and I'm immediately going to put the damn thing out and I'm going to be a billionaire off of this thing. And it doesn't happen.
Well, it's, creativity is also just kind of a progression. And I mean, I'm definitely happy Spotify was around when I was putting out all that garbage stuff in high school and college. Like, oh, woof, no, don't listen to this. But, when you take the long view and you just keep putting stuff out and you can kind of see the growth and whatever medium you're in. I think some people can kind of understand that and get that. And then it puts your earlier, less refined work into a bigger context and then maybe it's not as bad than maybe you thought it might have been. It's like, okay, there's some rough spots, but there's some good stuff in here and we're building up to it.
I completely agree with what you're saying. Absolutely. But I think that that there are a lot of people that are that assume that they are the best and that they aren't putting in the work to grow, right? And to hone those skills. But I'm for the availability of old work because I'm with you. I think that the full bibliography of an artist tells the full story, right? And there's value in that, especially if that artist has put in the work to grow.
I've been booed and I've had stuff thrown at me while on stage with my different bands. I suffer no pretenses, and I think that everyone just needs to have someone come up and violently get in their face and tell them how awful they are at what they're doing, and then you kind of shed it a little bit.
You need that, but you also need to be humble about it as well.
Yeah.
You can't.
Well, that's how you get humble.
You can't write shitty poetry and think that you're the greatest poet ever out there. And then if you can't take criticism for it either. I mean, and I've had people who have read my stuff from the night and they're like, oh, I read that thing about the weird thing about the deer. And I'm like, oh, that was so awful. Why does everybody keep bringing up this awful story, And it's funny, but I own it because I've gotten better. Because I'm like, you know what, that was the first million words. And I've gotten a lot better, hopefully, at writing. And I'm able to do this for a living now because hopefully all that garbage from the 90s made me a better writer. But when you get to that point in your mind, you're like, this is the greatest thing ever. I think that's when a lot of people, whether you're a musician or whatever, a lot of people, you kind of lose your way there. And then you're not progressing. You're not taking criticism. You're not learning your craft. You're not doing the things that you need to do as a creative person just to get better.
Right. But also, how old was this girl?
So she was, this was an online course, so I'm having to kind of put together some context clues, but a non-traditional student, so in her mid to late 20s at least, so not a teenager.
She should know better then.
But well, and the thing is,
life should have kicked her a couple times by now.
I don't actually mind that this student has the balls to like self-publish her collection of poetry and her accompanying CD, right? I like this does not bother me on a personal level. What bothers me is that I don't see any evidence in her work that she produced for the course that shows that she's interested at all in continuing to refine her skill set. The poetry is elementary in that sort of like confessional diary sort of tone, right? And so it becomes very personal, which is how all poetry starts, but there's no movement toward the universal. And that I think is one thing that's sort of missing, and there's no attempt there to try to learn how to make that turn. And I mean, I know this isn't a poetry podcast, but and I'm not really a poet, right? So, who am I? I'm just some asshole on the internet. So so are we all.
It's a good title for maybe your next collection, right?
Right. Yeah. Some asshole on the internet.
That's actually what I tell my daughter's friends whenever I drive them around. Although I say I'm the famous guy on the internet, and then they all Google me, and then they're like, "No, you're not." But actually, so I had some questions prepared, but now I just want to continue this vein of discussion because I like this. So where do you go then? And I'm just asking this in general to all three of you. Where do you go after you've been writing for a few decades and you hit that comfort spot, where you kind of know your wheelhouse for what you need to do to sit down and write, to create, to produce, and put something out there. But how do you make yourself more vulnerable and break out to put yourself in a position to continue to stretch and grow and get better? Because sometimes I feel that I'm not going to change and that I'm stuck in my ways. And, part of that is because I'm a grumpy old guy. And the other part of it is, I think I'm missing the boat on how to really push myself. So what do you guys think about like getting yourself into that state to do something different?
I'll feel that one. I think it really depends on how much money you're making. I mean, if you're AC/DC, shit, man, keep writing that same record over and over again. People are gonna buy it, and that's great. That's cool. I'm happy that AC/DC never tried to write like a reggae album. Like it's sometimes you got the formula. Do it. That's cool. Like that, you found your niche. God, people love it. God bless. But if it's not so much about the money, it's about the art itself. Then yeah, just try to mix it up. I mean, I switched out of a different medium. I was a musician, and then I got into books, and I kind of bumped. I hit a wall that I couldn't really move past. And I'm like, screw it, I'm doing something entirely different. I mean, that could be an answer. It could be trying to write outside your genre. It could be just trying to put it in front of a new group of people. It could be, taking Shane's class and letting him just tell you all the ways in which you can get better. I mean, there's no one single way to do it. And I think that, everyone, like wherever you are in your life or however long you've been doing it, I mean, are you even still satisfied operating within that kind of parameter or not? Are you getting itchy? Yeah, I don't know if that's an answer or not, but I
think it really absolutely depends. An answer.
Context, I think it's context.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, so it's all about whether or not you're content with where you are and what that looks like for you, right? I mean, for me, I am, because I don't depend on my writing for my income, right? Like it's nice to have that, but I'm not like, my books are not the breadwinner, right? Like the colleges. So I'll stick to the formula at the college because I'm required to, and because it pays the bills. And then I like to play in different genres and different mediums and all these different things. And I think that a lot of that is because I am really worried about that stagnation, and because I think that you can write the formula and you can write the album over and over again and change the words, or you can write the book and just kind of like tweak a couple of things here and there, but eventually it will start to get stale for you. And I think that once that happens, it becomes stale for the reader as well. And that, I think, is a little bit dangerous. And so while I might always return home to that contemporary fantasy wheelhouse because it's comfortable and I know how to do it, I think that there's real value in going out there and, like trying to write a song or trying to write a play. Like I adapted one of my short stories for the stage. And it just like kind of unlocks a different box, and it gives you another tool set, right, to play with. It's not perfect whenever you open it the first time, right? You've got to sharpen those things up and continue to work at it if it's something that you're serious about. But there's just real value in that. I think there's value in collaboration as well. There's something rejuvenating about finding a project to work on with someone else, whether that be a writing project or something else. So yeah, I think it's just about like allowing yourself the space to play while you're still doing the very dependable work that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the number one, like you said, are you paying your bills with it? Yes or no?
That's the
If
big
it's
one.
yes, then you might be a little more narrowly confined. If no, sky's the limit. Do whatever the heck you want. Get that creative bug out of you, and however it manifests itself.
Yeah, and that's what it is. To be creative, that's the fun of this. I mean, the money's great. All the accolades, the awards, all that other crap is great. But the bottom line is, I feel like all of us are writers. If God came down and said, you will never make another dime from this, we'd all still be writing. We'd all still be creating, because that's just part of who you are. And that's what I tell a lot of authors that I talk to. There's an author that I mentor, and he's like, oh, I read 100 books last year. I said, why? You should have written 100 books last year. Like you're taking naps and you're writing, and you're reading when you should be. I wake up every morning and I don't have to pay the bill. My wife's money, her career pays all the bills. This is fun for me. I'm full-time because of my wife. And she says that all the time. Just go get a cup of coffee and go write something. And that's, for me, I have to write something. I'm down when I don't write that day. And it's not about the money part of it. It's about just being creative. Since I was 12 years old, I've written something every day.
Right. That's what I was about to say. I feel like a lot of us have probably been writing since before we even had a concept of making money off of it. Like that.
Right.
I was writing stories and like making books and drawing covers and pasting all of that together when I was I had no concept of money or financial gain at that point. It was just something that I saw on the shelf. I liked a Goosebumps book and I wanted to make that at home.
Yeah. Well, me is 12 years old reading Dean Koontz books and thinking this multi-billionaire, up on the mountain pumping out these books for us. Like that wasn't attainable. At 12 years old, you don't even understand the concept of making money doing this.
Right.
I'm just excited. What's the next book? And then let me write really awful Dean Koontz ripoff, stories out of this and progress from there. And does it change anything when you get that first, that book is out now and now you've gotten those sales, and it's not just friends and family buying the books, it's some strange person in Iowa who gives you a review out of nowhere on Amazon, and you're like, a stranger is reading my stuff there. Does it change anything, perspective or anything in your heads?
That feels like a really tough question, because I love to know what anybody thinks about my book, right? Like love or hate, whatever. I think that I can learn something from any critical review, right? Critical meaning like close reading, right? Not like negative necessarily, though negative is fine. As long as it's substantial. So I think it absolutely changes the relationship that you have with the work. It has to, because now that story doesn't belong to you anymore. And I think that nothing makes that more real than getting a review from a stranger. That book belongs to the world, right? And you have no claim over it anymore. No matter how much you want to live on Twitter and talk about these characters until you're blue in the face and everybody hates you and the world that you created, those characters don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the people that read your book and loved it or hated it, right? And it absolutely, I think, changes it. I have always, release day for me has always been really weird, because there's this sort of, there's the contentment or the joy, the elation, I guess, of being done with this thing. I can finally put a pin on this, right? Like we're done. And but on the other side of it, there's just like this sadness that this thing that I've spent so much time with now is not mine anymore. And it's just this really complicated feeling on release day. That's my experience.
All right, I'll take a swing. Yeah, I think it's always kind of wild just when anyone ever consumes your work at all. It's just like, wait a minute, I thought this whole thing just lived in my head. And like, yeah, that's right. There's a world out there and people consume it and they have opinions on it. And sometimes it's a trip to see what people actually thought about it. It's like, wow, you read the whole thing. Oh, cool. And then you'll get
because
feedback
that's not like an afternoon, right? Like they invested
that's
time
that's
in
a
this
time.
thing.
It's not like, hey, check out my band's new single. I need
Right.
3.5 minutes of your time. It's like, yo, this is 85,000 words. It's going to take a couple weekends. But I always find it's interesting just to kind of see what people pull out of it, because you have your story and what it's about, and then you have like your subtext that you're trying to work in there and your different meanings, and just to see if people tie those threads together, if it just went over their head, or if they picked up on something that maybe wasn't even intentional. It's always very much in the eye of the beholder, and it's really cool to kind of see what someone got out of your work. Not necessarily even if it was something intentional or if it was, what you were trying to say in the first place. So it's kind of cool to kind of get that feedback back and say like, oh shoot, I didn't even know that this is something that someone could have gotten from this work. But hey,
I actually really love that when that happens, when somebody sort of picks up on something that maybe I didn't quite maybe not intend, but like that I didn't maybe pay attention to, and they pick up on something. I'm like, yo, like that's actually kind of cool that's in there.
And that's the fun thing about art in general, is it's just open to interpretation and what people pull from it, because they might be living in their own kind of thing at the moment, and it just speaks to them in a way that you might not have intended. But if it does, then great, because that's what it's all about. It's just,
or you didn't even
right in the soul,
or you didn't really even put it in the story. It's what they're, it's the old, what did the writer mean by the curtains were blue, and then they go through these. Oh, he's feeling awful, blah blah blah. And meantime, the writer says they're just fucking blue curtains.
Yeah,
That's and that's what it is. A lot of times I mean, even as a reader, I'll read stuff and I'll say, did they mean it this way? Is there a subtext? Are we going anywhere? Is this going to be part? And then it's gone. And I'm like, all right, that was just kind of thrown in. That's in my head. I'm reading between the lines on this one. And a lot of times it's fun when readers find those little Easter eggs, those little things, whether it's I'll put characters from different books, cameos or different things, or I mention a plot from another book or whatever. And then people are going, hey, I like what you did in this book. You added this character or this, or, different things. For me, I'm like, that's awesome that you caught that, But a lot of times I read and I go, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's not in. Are you reading my book? That's not in there.
Well, and that's what I mean when I say that it doesn't belong to us anymore, right? Like they're able to ascribe their own meaning to those things, and I think that's what makes art so cool, right? And because it is an absolute collaboration between creator and consumer, and I mean consumer as in someone that consumes it, not as someone that buys it necessarily, but because there's that is an active relationship between those two, right? Roland Barthes would say that the author is dead, right? Like you were talking about that sort of like, how much does it matter, like what the author intended? And as much as it hurts sometimes for me to say, I don't think that it really matters very much at all what I intended. If someone else is able to get meaning from it, then I think that that's what ultimately matters, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Chuck, you got a last question?
Not a question per se, but just more, I guess, comment to continue on this thread is, we've talked about a lot of times on our podcast, that whole concept of, the eye of the beholder and reviews, because a lot of times authors, and you see this not only with newer authors, but even with some seasoned authors, that they get really bent out of shape, about reviews and about what people think about their work, and it's kind of hard not to, because you hold it near and dear, and it's your baby, you created it, but it's it's something that comes up very often with a lot of authors, and we address it more than a handful of times on the show. But Shane, I liked your perspective too, just in which I never really kind of put two and two together, even though I guess intrinsically I knew that is just the whole, it's no longer yours. And it's true because, going back to, even when we were talking with Paul before about Iron Maiden and stuff earlier on, when you listen to music, that music means something to you. You remember a specific day in your car, smoking a cigarette, what the weather was like, the dark road you were on, whatever, how that girl hurt you, everything. Like you said, that belongs to you, not to Bruce Springsteen or to Iron Maiden or to whoever else. But yet as a creator, you can't help but feel motherly or fatherly, over that work and kind of how it's interpreted. So it's kind of a fine line. And, I know I struggle with it. I don't necessarily get bent out of shape too bad, but I do care about what people think, whether they like it or not. So
I have a comment against to go with that one. I always go back to music, right? Because like the vast majority of my creative career has been in that kind of medium. You can get complimented 100 times and criticized once, and you're going to remember that criticism more than any of the kind words anyone ever shares. And a lot of the most vivid memories I have of people reacting to my work have been when they were negative. But I have two particular that always I always go back to whenever I get any kind of criticism of my work. I remember, because it's always one of two things. One of them was my band was playing at the Whiskey A Go Go in Hollywood, and I forget who we were opening up for, some like new metal band. This was like the early 2000s, and that's what the sound was at the time. And there was this guy who was in the front and flipped this off for the entirety of the show. Just stood there, middle finger up, didn't say a word.
Was it Fred Durst?
No, it was not. Just stared at us, middle finger, like eye contact, not breaking eye, the entire show. And after the show, I'm looking, and I mean, I think I was like a freshman or a sophomore in college. I was still young. And I remember we loaded our gear out, and the guy was like, "Hey man, good set." Like, you shitting me, bro? So some people want to provoke you, and they want to see what you say, and they want to see what you do. And then another time was my band was on tour, and the same band, but we had since moved from our punk kind of phase into, we're a little better now. We've discovered like Delta blues, and now we're going to fancy ourselves a heavy blues band, right? So every musician goes through that phase. Rock musician goes through that phase at some point. They discover blues. They're like, this is what I got to do. So we were playing a show, and it was with a bunch of hardcore bands. And so now we're in like the mid-aughts, late aughts. And for anyone that was in like an underground rock band, that's all the touring circuit. That's what it was just like, right? It was just a whole lot of that up and down wherever you went. It was hardcore bands. And so we were playing a show with all these hardcore bands, and the place had maybe like 300 people in it, 400 people at the show. And, there were people who were like into it, but a lot of the people stayed to the back with just, arms crossed, arms folded, looking tough by the bar. Oh, I don't like this. This isn't heavy enough for me. What's this? I need more breakdowns, a lot of that stuff. And they all just stared at us from like far back, not really engaging with the music. And so, but we played a great set. I was really proud of that. We sounded great. The room sounded awesome. And after the show, I went back to man the merch booth because, again, we're a broke band on tour, and that's how we pay for our gas. And I'm sitting there, and one by one, people were coming up being like, "Hey, I don't want to say anything around my friends, but I thought you guys fucking killed it. You guys were great." But they only like hardcore music. And then the next person would come up like 2 minutes later, "Hey, I don't know about my friends, but like I thought you were awesome." And da-da-da-da-da. And so for some people, they might really like it, but they're not going to show you that. They're not going to show, for one reason or another, they're not going to let you know that they really enjoyed it, and their initial reaction might just be negative. So if you get negative reaction, or if you get some kind of critique, like, don't let it live in your head. It's odds are they probably enjoyed it a lot more than they said they did. And if the fact that they want to spend all their time really shitting on your work, that's just another form of love, because now they're taking their time to engage with you on what you did. So
Yeah.
The worst review is no review.
Yeah,
I would rather
absolutely.
you shit
Especially
all
in a
over my
world
stuff.
driven by algorithms, right?
Yeah.
Like
that's right.
we need the clicks. And if you want to spend some time giving me a negative one, you're just helping it out. I would say just two things if I have a minute to that point. I would say one of the things that I always tell my students in creative writing is that it is essential that you learn the difference in negative feedback that can teach you something, right? Like valuable feedback, and negative feedback that's just negative, right? Like you have to learn to look for substance, because there are times that you can learn from negative feedback, right? But then there are also times when people are just being shitty. So there's that idea, right? And then I would say that I probably forgot the other thing I was going to say. So whatever. But it was super profound, and everyone should be impressed.
Number 2, fuck them.
Right, but that's
Yeah.
the other thing, right? Is
Yeah.
Fuck them for sure.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome, guys. I appreciate you guys coming on. I like how we went all over the place, which was awesome. I can't wait to hear your band on Spotify, Paul, your punk band.
Oh yeah, we were pre-Spotify. The only thing I have that's on Spotify was like my prog rock band. It's called The Infamous They. We got one record up. Go give it a listen.
Any of those old bands on MySpace?
Yes, and there's a couple of videos on YouTube. You can check out Inverse. That was the touring band that got all the love and hate.
Nice, awesome. Well, thanks guys for coming on. Chuck, you got anything before we go?
First of all, I want to repeat what you're saying. I mean, I thought this was this was like the true purpose of a roundtable discussion, just kind of chewing the fat on the business. And the only thing that could possibly make it better would be Reaper's Brew Coffee. See how I worked that in there?
Nice.
Everything is microbrewed, fresh roasted, 2 great flavors, Murder Mud, which is the regular, and Electric Chair, which is the high caffeine. And if you use the coupon code MANDO, that's MANDO, at checkout, you'll receive 10% off of new orders, plus receive a free gift. Go to reapersbrew.com and tell them Paul and Shane sent you.
All right, guys, thanks. I appreciate you guys coming on, and definitely in the future, I'd love to have both of you back.
Hey,
Absolutely.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good times.